eyes don't wear white.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Classic Gamer 74. I'm your host Anthony Gamer and this is part 2 of emulators. In the previous episode I described what emulators are, why people use them, and some of the ones that I myself personally use. So in this second part I'm going to show you more of the emulators that I use and how I capture the game footage that I put in every episode. So without further ado, let's head over to my computer and check it out. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. So first thing we're going to discuss is going back to one of my favorite emulators, or home for emulators, and that being Launchbox with RetroArch built in. If you have not yet got Launchbox and RetroArch, I highly recommend it. If you are into emulation, this is where you need to be. As you can see, I showed you last time, but I'll show you again. All of my emulators, not all of them, excuse me, a large percentage of my emulators are right here where I can access them very easily. Now, I've added a couple more things. I'll show you that before I get into the first emulator I wanted to discuss. I actually added the CPS-1. Now what this is are early Capcom games. You can see I got quite a few of them here. There are quite a few, and yes, this is about the only place you are going to be able to get some of these games. As in the past, they all used to work on MAME, but like I said, as time goes on, less and less games seem to work on MAME. So I have them all right here using RetroArch. You do have to make a couple of quick adjustments in order to use it, but if you want to play your Street Fighter games and early Capcom games, this is the way to do it. And I've also added CPS-2. These are, I guess, are the second generation Capcom games. Same as before, you can use them through RetroArch. Kind of like a MAME sort of program. The way it works is kind of like MAME. But again, you have all your Capcom games here at your disposal. Some of these, of course, you see that I have more than one. These particular games sometimes have some hack versions or some other things. Plus, not all of them always work. Again, that's the number one lesson with emulators, is that not every game is going to work. It's just one of those things you kind of have to accept. But I wanted to add that, let you guys know about that particular program, CPS-1, CPS-2, and you can get CPS-3. The only reason I don't use CPS-3 is because technically this isn't a gaming computer. I need to add some stuff onto it, or basically just get a whole new computer. So I don't know if the CPS-3 games would work on here, but I'll probably try. Also, I had discussed DOSBox in the previous episode, but I found out that you can also put those DOS games here in Launchbox. So you can see I got some of my old MS-DOS games that I loved, and some that look pretty cool, and I've added them on here. They all don't work, just again, that's kind of a given, but I'm very happy with the fact that I have them all right here at my disposal, those that do work. So those are just a couple updates I wanted to add from the last video. So let's get started in checking out our first emulator. Okay, come on. The computer's been acting up lately. I need to call a friend of mine and have him scan it. The best emulator to use is Caprice Forever. Caprice Forever is a type of computer emulator. Actually, it's about as realistic as you're going to get. This thing actually acts like a computer. Even has the disk running like a computer would. If somebody put a lot of work into this. All right, let me show you just real quick some of the commands. Now, again, you have to kind of know the commands for these computers. See how it's simulating a disk running? That is so cool. Okay, so let's type in run. And we'll put in the game name. I believe it's pool.bas. And then it should start up. So like I said, you do kind of have to know a couple computer commands, but honestly, the Amstrad CPC was a very easy to use computer, and you have your commands up here that you can use if you need a little bit of help. So really worth adding this computer in because of the fact that it has some really cool games that we didn't get in North America that were, of course, exclusive for this computer. And you can see I've got 2,683 games in here, so if I wanted to try them all out, it would take me a little while. So, all right, and next we head into Neo Geo. Now, in the past, Neo Geo, much like the CPS games, used to work on MAME, but no longer. I think you have to have an older version of MAME, but whatever. So you can actually play the Neo Geo games here on Launchbox through RetroArch. I've got, I think, just about all the games. I may be missing a couple, but as far as I know, I think I have every Neo Geo game. And it works perfectly through RetroArch. You have shift, key is insert coin, enter is start. Easy to program the controls through Joy-to-Key, as I showed you last week. So, all right, so let's move on to the N64. Now, N64 was a game system that I did not personally own. When this came out, I was pretty much a PlayStation man, I guess you could say. But now, looking back, on the recommendations of several of my viewers and friends, I have been playing some games for that system. Of course, on a previous episode, I did discuss Milo's Astro Lanes, but I'll have other games that'll be coming up later as well. Now, the best emulator I found for this is Project 64. It's a pretty easy to use program, as it is sometimes a royal pain to program a joypad so that you can play these games, as the N64 joypad had a lot going on it. But anyway, so another reason I don't have a whole lot of games, though, is because these games do take up a lot of space. So be warned, if you are planning on emulating N64, these games are quite large. Not as large as others, but quite large nonetheless. All right, now let's get into my second all-time favorite video game console, the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, these games really are not as large as you kind of would think they are, but there are several of them. I mean, there are a lot. As you can see, I've got 1,076 games in here. And these aren't all of them either. I'll show you in a second why. But regardless, now there are two ways you can go with this. You can either use an emulator called Nestopia, which is really good. I mean, it is probably the best currently functioning emulator for the NES. There were some in the past that don't work anymore on modern computers, but that one is really good. Also, use RetroArch, of course, as it functions well. And the best part is that they both of those emulate the turbo buttons. For those of you that have played the NES back in the day, or still do, etc., you know that you need those turbo buttons. So they are included with both emulators. Now, the reason I would say to use either or goes back to the idea that some of the games will not work on Nestopia. I don't know why. Some of the games just don't function. So if it doesn't work on Nestopia, it probably will work on RetroArch or vice versa. Now, let's head over to the Nintendo Famicom disk system. And I know what you're saying, well, isn't it kind of the same? Well, yes and no. However, they do have to be, when you put them into Launchbox, you have to classify them as Famicom. And of course, there are several games for the Famicom that did not get released in North America or anywhere else in the world. So it's great to have both of them. And just like the NES, it can be emulated on Nestopia or RetroArch. Now, of course, some of the games for the Famicom are two-sided. Well, Nestopia has a built-in command where you can simulate flipping the disc over, so don't be concerned about that at all. Alright, now let's look at the Game Boy varieties. Now, to be honest with you, I would recommend using what is called Visual Boy Advance, this emulator, and use it outside of Launchbox. Now here's why. I have all the varieties of Game Boy games. Let me show you over here. Go back here. I have Game Boy, Game Boy Advanced, and Game Boy Color. So I have all the varieties of Game Boy games. Now, for reasons I don't quite understand, they don't really seem to work that well when you try to play them through Launchbox. I don't know why. It just was acting kind of goofy. But regardless, I think the best way to play is on Visual Boy Advance. Okay, next we go into the Sega. Now, what's interesting about Sega games is they can all use the same emulator. That is called the Kiga Fusion. It will play all Sega system games. Sega 32X, Sega CD, Sega CD32, Sega Genesis, and Sega Master System, and Sega SG-1000. All of them will work under that same one emulator. And next we have the Sony PlayStation, or PS1, whichever you prefer. Now, the best emulator that I have found to use this is called EPSXE. Again, that's EPSXE. Very user-friendly. It guides you through setting up your controller. Now, another thing to let you know about, these games are huge. These are big files. So, if you decide that you want to play the PS1 and you don't happen to not have it anymore, just be prepared that these games are pretty big. Plus, there are some steps that you have to go through in order to set up the emulator. In one of the videos on the channels that I recommended, they have videos that go step by step and show you how to set this up. Alright, and next we have the Super Nintendo or the Super Famicom. They are pretty much interchangeable here. Now, the best system, or excuse me, the best emulator to use for this system is one called SNESW. Probably like the best one to use. I prefer it over RetroArch, even though you could use it. I've been using it for years now, and I just really like it. I like the way it lets you program your joypad. Alright, next I'm going to discuss emulators that I use outside of Launchbox. Now, for anyone who's ever wanted to play the Atari ST computer, you have what is called Atari. That's this right here. And like a lot of the computer emulators, you do have to have a familiarity with the computer and how it works. So, not a hard computer to use by any stretch of the imagination. You can pick it up. If you have even a rudimentary knowledge of computers, you can pick it up pretty quickly. In a previous episode, I discussed the Fairchild Channel F. This was a very short-lived game system and one of the first to use cartridges for their software. Now, even though this system didn't last or was nowhere near as popular as the Atari 2600 or other game systems, it was a pretty cool game system and had some really cool games on it. Now, the only emulator that I know of that will play the Fairchild Channel F games is MESS, MESS. This is not exactly an emulator I'm really crazy about, but it does the job of emulating the Fairchild Channel F, and like I said, as far as I know, it's the only one that'll do it. It is quite similar to MAME in a lot of ways, but as I said, it's not really a user-friendly. All right, if you are a person that likes old computers, and you probably remember the TRS-80. This was a computer that was made by Radio Shack, and it ran on carts, discs, as well as cassettes. The only person I knew that had one of these was one of my teachers, my 6th grade science teacher. So I didn't really get a lot of exposure to this computer. I actually remember meeting a couple people that had it, but I personally never messed with it myself. The emulator for that is called the VCC, or they also call it Coco. It's a very easy computer to figure out. Now, there is a video that I'm going to put in the description below that will show you how to get this up and running and how to play it. But as you can see, it's a pretty cool it's got some pretty cool games on it that run very easily. Our final emulator for today is a computer that probably most of us got our first taste of computers on, and that is the Apple IIe. So what we're using for this computer is called Enhanced Apple IIe Emulator, or AppleWin. Very user-friendly, and I would also recommend using this outside of Launchbox. It is possible to actually use it on Launchbox, but I had a real hard time getting it to work with the games. So I just pretty much like to use it as is on this, on its own. So it works pretty much like what you would expect the Apple II computer to work like. It emulates various programs and games, and yet allows you to have full use of the keyboard. If you'd like to learn more about Launchbox and RetroArch and how to use them, go to the YouTube channels that I listed in the comments below and check them out, as they are very helpful and take you every single step of the way to set up your computer so that you can enjoy the best emulated games. Well, that brings us to the end of another exciting episode of Classic Gamer 74. I hope you enjoyed it and found it very informative. If you did, you know what to do. Give me a great big thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to click that little bell icon down there so you'll be notified when I upload new episodes. In our next episode, we'll be heading back to the Atari 5200, where I will be presenting prototypes for the Atari 5200 Part 2, so you will not want to miss that. Don't forget that I am going to be live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central Time, so feel free to come out and hang out with me and discuss anything you like. Alright then, until next time, this is Anthony Gamer, and I want you all to have a good and a safe day. I will see you soon. Goodbye.